When you guys see the level of success that I have today, which is a $5 million net worth at 33 years old, I know you may think that I had a really easy life and I must have had a lot of things handed to me to be able to get to this point, but that is really far from the truth. There is a lot of stuff that I have had to overcome in my life to get to this point, not only financially, but from like a generational trauma perspective as well. I lived in a very tumultuous household growing up, and I'm not going to get too much into that because I am working really hard on repairing and restoring this relationship with my parents. They've shown me that they have grown and that they have changed, that they have become incredible grandparents. Unfortunately, where they are right now is not how they were during my childhood. There was no money and there was abuse and there was jail. And for a while when I was really young, I dealt with this by being like hyper focused on my studies. I loved being like the teacher's pet because I wanted that positive attention from like an adult. So I worked really, really hard in school, right? I got straight A's, I was top of my class. But then it got to a point where I started to become a teenager. Some things had happened in my home and I just started dealing with it a little bit differently. So instead of like burying my head in books, I started partying a lot. I started drinking, I started doing drugs. I was fighting at school, I was being suspended all the time. There was one point where I actually failed all of my classes in my last semester of grade 11 because I never showed up and I showed up drunk and da-da-da. And at that point I was like, why would I even go to school anymore? And at that point I also really wanted to get away from my house as well because it wasn't a healthy place to be. So dropped out of school at 16 and started working full-time. I did a night shift for a Crime Stoppers answering center. From there, I really hit my rock bottom more times than I care to admit, both from like a drinking and drugs perspective and like a mental health perspective. Like I was unwell. I was suffering a lot with anxiety and depression and self-harm. There's a reason why I have tattoos all over my forearm, but I hit this like catalyst where I was like, okay, you know what? I don't want this in my life anymore. So I'm going to change it. I got my GED. I then put myself through school, buckled down, got my shit together, got back into my studies, graduated from a 4-year degree in 2 years at the top of my class, started my corporate job the very next day after my final exam. And that was a job, I think there were like 13,000 people that applied for that position and they hired me. And I just thought that that was so great and I was so proud of myself. But it felt like the people around me were not willing to see me as the person that I had become and were still kind of thinking of me as the person that I was when I was a teenager. That person wasn't actually me. That was the trauma coming out. That was me trying to handle something that I didn't have the resources to handle at that time. That's kind of when my shopping addiction started, not necessarily because like I wanted to buy a lot of things, but because I wanted to prove that I was now successful, that I was now a different person, that I now had money and I could have all of the things. And these experiences with my behaviors and my mindset and my mental health is part of the reason why I focus so much on mindset while I also teach you guys about personal finance and investing in like the $1 million tactic. Because until you get to the root cause, until you explore the reasons why you are where you're at, you're never going to be able to get ahead long term. So anyways, this ended up being a lot longer than I expected it to be, and I had to pause a couple of times because it got a little bit emotional, but suffice it to say, the message I want you to take out of this is where you have been, who you have been, that doesn't mean anything about who you get to be in the future. We wake up every day and we have the opportunity to reinvent ourselves. We don't have to just write a new chapter to our book. We can throw the whole damn book away and start a new book. We can become anyone we want to be. We can have anything we want to have. The quality of your life will be dependent on how much you're willing to bet on yourself, even when everybody else says you can't.